Somalia's government says it's killed one of the co-founders of the armed group Al-Shabab, Abdullahi Nadir. Government officials say Nadir was killed in a joint operation with the country's international partners. Somalia's information ministry says the operation that killed Nadir happened on Saturday. Somalia says Nadir was Al-Shabab's chief prosecutor and was aligned to replace the group's leader, Ahmed Deria, who is sick. In recent weeks, Somali security forces have touted gains made against the Al-Qaeda-linked group while fighting alongside local self-defense groups. But Al-Shabab has continued to conduct deadly raids, including 2 last Friday, which killed at least 16 people, and another on Monday that police say left 5 others dead. Since 2006, the group has killed tens of thousands of people in bombings in its fight to overthrow Somalia's Western-backed central government and implement its interpretation of Islamic law. Somalia's military is supported by US troops and drones and an African Union peacekeeping mission. It's not immediately clear which international partners participated in the operation that killed Nadir. Conflict resolution expert Dr. Kingsley Makhubela joins us now to speak about this development. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us, Dr. Makhubela. Well, in fact, as I was reading that it's not yet clear which international partners, I see the U.S. Command Center has actually claimed victory for it, saying that they have managed to kill Nadir. Your thoughts on this?
Good evening, SABC. Always a pleasure to talk to you. The U.S. has claimed responsibility for the drone attack on Abdullahi Nadir. There's been a pattern in terms of the U.S. behavior dating back to when Al-Shabab was formed in 2005 to eliminate leaders of Al-Shabab. The fear, of course, of the American comes from the fact that Al-Shabab was formed the Islamic court, which deposed all the warlords who used to be in control of Mogadishu. And that's the only time that Mogadishu has seen peace and Somalia has seen peace. It's when the courts were in charge, the Islamic courts were in charge. But when the Islamic courts were in charge, the interpretation of the Islamic courts in terms of the Sharia is totally different from what the Americans are thinking. I mean, they killed at first the youngest leader of Al-Shabab, and I had contact with the youngest leader of Al-Shabab at that stage, Dahir Airo. Very young fellow, very militant, eliminated him, but the pattern continues. There's a need at one stage to reach out to the elders, because remember, these militants, they get their support from the elders, and they're supported by clans, and clan elders provide military support to them. So there's a need to reach out to have some discussion. This morning, as a matter of fact, Tsepiso, Al-Shabaab claims to have killed close to 25 people in Beledweyne. And Beledweyne, it's in Hiran state, which borders with Ethiopia. Now, you're gonna see these challenges given what Ethiopia is going through at the same time now.
So just in terms of this, because firstly there is should I say, distaste, especially for some African pundits, of the activity of AFRICOM on the continent, and as you say, the role that it's played in Somalia had an influence on how Al-Shabaab continues its operation. The fact that it claims responsibility right after the Somali government has claimed responsibility for this killing, for me it was somewhat confusing that who's supporting whom here in this operation. And particularly of interest is the fact that you have the new president, Sheikh Mohammed, having appointed a former Al-Shabaab spokesman, Mukhtar Rabo, into his new cabinet. What does this then all mean?
You know, at one stage, the Somali government had a good approach. I mean, Mukhtar Abdo was kept in prison for quite some time during the elections because he has a lot of support within his clan elders. And I think the realization by the government to pull him on board. He defected, of course, from Al-Shabab. But the Americans and their attitude of really eliminating leaders, if you look at what Al-Shabab was in 2005 when it was formed and what it is now, it is a very formidable force now. A few months ago, they attacked a hotel in Mogadishu, and they held that hotel siege for close to 3 days. It was very difficult, and a large number of people were killed. It was very difficult to break that siege. They're a formidable military force, and there's a need, in my own view, to reach out to elders. I mean, if you reach out to the Hawiye elders and the Darod elders, who are really fundamental in terms of this conflict, it will be very helpful. But there's no understanding in terms of the Americans. Americans have operated in that way. You tell them about a group, they want to kill the leader. Killing the leader is not resolving the problem.
You mentioned earlier on that through your communication with a former Al-Shabab member, that their interpretation, the Americans' interpretation of the kind of religious law edicts that Al-Shabaab foresees for Somalia is completely at odds with what Al-Shabaab is thinking. Are you able to expand a little bit more? What are the main points of dissonance?
The Somalis, they belong to a sect called Sunni within the Islamic faith. But within the Sunni group, you find the Salafi and the Sufi. The Sufis are much more very accommodating. They have tombs of the ancestors, and they continue to go to tombs of the ancestors. But the Salafis don't believe in that. And this comes from the teaching of Muhammad ibn al-Wahhad, who is actually still a very big, prominent scholar in terms of how the Saudis interpret the Islamic law. Now, the Islamic law varies in terms of the interpretation from country to country. And the Somali interpretation of Sharia is the same as what you would find in Kenya. In Kenya, they call it the Qada courts. So you find the pattern of behavior much more tolerant as opposed to the Salafis. And there's no way that the elders in Somalia would tolerate the Salafis and not go and actually protect graves such of, they used to call him the British Met Muhammad Mullah, who was one of the philosophers and the founders of the Somali sect of Sufis. So there is a different understanding of how the Somalis interpret the Sharia code and how they implement the Sharia code. Okay. Of course, when the Sharia code was implemented in Mogadishu, there were elements that were trained in Afghanistan who wanted to bring the much more extreme interpretation of the Sharia, but they were defeated in the long run. And the Americans could not want to, they did not want to understand this, and they went for the elimination of some leaders.
Nadir's killing, what does it mean for Al-Shabaab going forward, given the fact that we have Diria who is sick? But I understand that Nadir was former head of the Shura Council, the group's director for finances. What does this development mean for its organization as a group?
Nadir was actually a prosecutor in the Sharia court. Of course, the prosecutors play a dominant role in terms of enforcing the understanding of the Sharia. But he'll be replaced, I can tell you, by another leader in the next few days. It will not change the dynamics of the conflict in Somalia. And I think the international community keep on implementing the same strategy in dealing with the Somali conflict. And they expect different results. Since 2005, it's been saying the pattern has been the same. But Al-Shabaab has become much more stronger. Al-Shabaab's outreach has moved to Uganda. They've outreach to Kenya. They even have in Seychelles, they have some of their operatives there. Now in Mozambique, we've been told in Cabo Delgado that Al-Shabaab is involved. So you can see from 2005 how strong they have become. And I think we continue, and I'm saying we, the international community, continue to think that a military solution would be the only one in Somalia. I personally don't think so. I've studied the conflicts there, and I've looked at the behavior of different forces that are involved in the conflict. And I think at one stage, a reach out and a solution, a diplomatic solution, would be very prudent to resolve that conflict. It has been going on for many years.